Chairman of the Presidential Task Force, honorable ministers, members of the PTF, gentlemen of the press, good evening. Today I'm going to briefly talk about the elections in Ondo, opening of schools, and clarify a bit about the international travel portal. I will start with the international travel portal. We've had a lot of queries with regards to the generation of QR codes or barcodes. The QR code can be generated after entering your health questionnaire and uploading your COVID-19 negative PCR result when you are coming into the country. This will enable you to generate a QR code that would clearly specify that you have not paid for the COVID test, but can still allow you to come to board. If you have paid, you can generate a second QR code, a final QR code, which will be the final one that will have details of your payment and tell you how to go about to do the lab test at day 7 on arrival. Now, the reason why we need the QR code is because we have to move away from paper copies of health questionnaires, and we have to move away from paper copies of COVID-19 PCR results. At the moment, we have not made the QR code mandatory for boarding, but in the coming weeks we will, and we are asking passengers to please familiarize themselves with the portal. Generation of the QR code is not dependent on payment, but it is necessary for travel, and it will be made mandatory in the coming weeks. With regards to the elections in Ondo, as we all know, on Saturday, Ondo State will hold governorship elections across 18 local government areas. We're expecting about 1.5 million eligible people to cast their votes across 3,000 polling units in the state. So this is clearly a huge exercise. It's a huge exercise that would also come with risks. Therefore, in order to protect voters, election officials, and candidates in the electoral process, we urge everyone to strictly comply with the INEC guidelines that we have worked with INEC to set up with regards to safe elections. For clarity, these are some of the key elements of the guidelines. Face masks are mandatory across all polling unit locations. No face mask, no voting. Physical distancing must be enforced, especially in queuing at polling units. Alcohol-based hand sanitizers will be provided. Polls will commence at 8:30 a.m. to close at 2:30 p.m., but anybody in the outer queue by 2:30 p.m. will still be allowed to vote. There will be two queues. There will be an outer queue and an inner queue, i.e. a two-tiered queuing system. Voters will be brought into the voting area periodically from the outer queue into the inner queue in order to prevent overcrowding. Chairs, tables, and workplaces will be disinfected regularly. PPE will be provided to polling staff, including infrared thermometers for temperature monitoring. And at the close of the polls, staff will ensure that materials are disinfected properly and packaged carefully. We encourage all 17 political candidates of the Ondo elections to please lead by example. Public safety is our main priority, and we urge voters, candidates, and all election officials to adhere strictly to the safety measures that we have put in place with INEC. We must work together to ensure that the protocols issued by the NCDC, PTF, state committees on COVID-19, health authorities, and INEC are observed. We certainly cannot afford to lose the little gain we have made in the fight against the pandemic after the elections. With regards to opening of the schools, we have been asked frequently what guided our decision. So the sort of questions we've asked include, are schools able and ready to implement infection prevention and control measures? We've also considered the capacity of learning facilities nationwide to maintain safe school operations in order to mitigate risk. We've looked at the level of community transmission in those areas, the mode of travel, as well as other community-related risk factors. In doing so, the Federal Ministry of Education, the PTF, and NCDC have developed guidelines to ensure that schools can reopen, minimize the risk of transmission, and continue to operate safely. Schools and educational bodies that plan to reopen must have detailed communication protocols that include parents, school health teams, school authorities, and local state officials. They must also have a system for providing regular updates to parents, staff, and relevant authorities, as well as communicate changes to procedures effectively and clearly, as well as taking sufficient measures to understand how COVID-19 can spread and how you can mitigate transmission in line with official guidelines. Specifically, school authorities have the responsibility to ensure that everyone gaining access to their schools is screened properly, is wearing a mask, and sanitizing their hands. Boarding schools must have identified areas for screening and putting positive students aside. There must be access to running water of some sort and hand-washing facilities. The health staff, particularly in boarding schools, must be trained and provided with PPE. There must be appropriate waste management systems. Health facilities that are within the schools, that serve the schools, should have the ability to cater for an outbreak, and a response protocol must be in place for day schools, students who fall ill or test positive. And in this regard, it is important to involve parents and make sure that parents have signed consent forms in advance in the situation that urgent testing may be required of students. Schools should also work in synergy with the local government rapid response teams and collaborate with the state ministries of health on planning, implementation, and opening of the schools. We encourage schools to consider creative solutions to abide by these guidelines. These include considering outdoor learning where weather and security permit, considering staggered attendance to avoid crowding of classes, or dividing classes into morning and afternoon sessions, alternate day attendance for students to minimize the number of students in each class, and adjusting teaching delivery, such as through the use of distant learning that will limit interactions, the use of multimedia materials, etc. The federal government has developed the procedures and protocols mentioned for the safe resumption of the nation's education system. We urge school authorities to adhere to them so that Nigerian schools can continue to be safe places for learning. Nevertheless, we must mitigate the risk of students becoming infected with COVID-19 to protect them, to protect their families, and our collective future. We must not take these guidelines for granted. It is our collective responsibility to protect students from exposure to the coronavirus. While we encourage teachers and parents not to despair with this new normal, because this is the new normal for now, it may be challenging for schools to resume, but in time, I am very certain that we will cherish the efforts that we have put in place to make sure that our young people have a safe and brighter future. Thank you.